You've heard me say over and over again throughout this series that it is very important that the minister of music teach others his or her value to the ministry. You know, during my first ministry assignment, our motto became confirming our existence. You know, because at the time, the whole concept of full-time ministry in the black church was relatively new. So people had questions. Why do we need a full-time staff? What do they do all day? So we took on the challenge to try and teach everyone and anyone our value to the ministry. Because remember, the Sunday morning worship goers have no idea what the minister of music does in between Sundays. They have no idea what it takes to prepare what it is they enjoy during worship on Sunday morning. So for me, I began with the congregation. I pulled out volunteers from the congregation to help me with some of the detail work to prepare for the following Sunday. Things like phone calls, preparing materials for the choir rehearsals, duplicating, and other things that would come up. And the other thing that I would do was I put a great deal of effort in trying to enhance the singing of the congregation, trying to develop their enthusiasm for singing. You know, because I taught them that worship is not a spectator's event. You don't have to wait for somebody to sing your song. You can learn to sing your song yourself. Because when we lift our voice to the Lord, God does not judge us based on what our voice sounds like. He listens first to the voice of the heart. Because, trust me, there are many singers with wonderful and beautiful voices that God has never heard. Now, one of the first programs that I developed was the Children's Music Ministry, a graded choir program, kids from 3 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 11. And the Minister of Christian Education and I joined forces to develop this Saturday morning program that we call LAMBS, LAMBS, an acronym standing for Learning, Arts and Crafts, Music, Bible, and Shepherding. My volunteer staff expanded because there were people that we wanted to bring in who had expertise in arts and crafts, who were good Bible teachers for children, and who helped with the music. We even pulled in parents to help us with the kids, take them on bathroom breaks, help to line them up so that they can move from one class to the next. Fortunately, we were located right in the center of two housing projects, which gave us an opportunity to really pull in many of those kids that lived in those housing projects. And we found that the Children's Music Ministry was a great outreach ministry because we found out that wherever kids are excited about being, eventually parents, grandparents, uncles, and aunts are going to want to come and see what they're so excited about. And often when they come, they like what they see also, and many become members. During worship, I would deliberately turn my attention to the congregation during the morning hymn, encouraging them to give themselves to the singing. Sometimes I would do a very short explanation, kind of backstory of the song that we were singing. Sometimes I would even teach a song during worship because I wrote several songs specifically for the congregation, like Acceptable to You, I wrote for the congregation. Let the Word of Christ Dwell in You, I wrote for the congregation. Oh Lord, Fix Me, I wrote for the congregation. It got to the point where congregants were excited about those moments during worship. They looked forward to those moments during worship. And all of the time, I was working my way into the hearts of the people. And they began to see my value to the ministry and to worship. The congregation began to be so excited about singing until it led me to develop a unique choir that I call the layman's choir. Now, the layman's choir was for anyone in the congregation who ever thought about or dreamed about singing. There were no auditions. Anyone who wanted to become a member of the layman's choir could come. Now, my objectives for that, it was a 4-week summer program. My objectives for that summer program was to, first of all, of course, to teach them music that the entire congregation would learn, but also to teach them who I was, what I did, how I did it, why I did it. Now, the music that I taught to the layman's choir, I had already taught to the sanctuary choir beforehand, so I'd have a floor team. So at the end of that 4-week period, the layman's choir would be the music for the second morning service. It was so successful that after the first year, the choir loft could not hold the number of people who wanted to be a part of the layman's choir. Now, keep in mind that all of what I'm talking about I did as a full-time minister of music. There's a difference between full-time and being part-time. I had a full-time staff. I had an administrator and I had 2 musicians working on staff, all full-time, that would help me with the detailed work in between Sundays to get things prepared. Now, I didn't have a full-time staff when I first started. It was just me when I first started. I had to create a need for a staff. I had to create a need to bring on an administrator and other musicians. See, the music department was growing so rapidly, the space that was allotted for the music ministry to conduct all of their work had just gotten too small. So they ended up building a wing specifically for the music ministry. I'll never forget the morning that the pastor introduced this whole concept of having to build a new wing for the music ministry. He said to the congregation that morning, he said, look, we've either got to grow with Mr. Wilson or I'm going to have to fire him. So, of course, they built the music wing. Part-time musicians don't have the luxury of having that kind of help. They aren't getting paid that much, so bringing on somebody, additional, to help them is kind of out of the question because, part-time musicians have to sometimes handle 3 or 4 different jobs. I mean, they're the keyboardist, they're the choir director, they're the administrator, they have to do the band. I mean, they're expected to do all of that without very much help. And that is unfortunate, because I've heard pastors. I heard one pastor talking to another, and he was bragging about how little he paid his minister of music. I mean, I've heard pastors say things like, "Hey, man, musicians are a dime a dozen," or things like, "All musicians want is money," and those statements also prove the whole idea of how musicians, their value is minimized, not respected. Now, in hiring a minister of music, particularly if the person you're looking at is relocating, there's some things that the church should consider. Cost of living, for instance, housing. If the person you're bringing on is a family person with school-age kids, what kind of schools will be available to them? Healthcare, disability, retirement. Do you think that's asking too much? I don't. And I refuse to believe that the church cannot meet at least some of those needs, if it's important to the church to do so. Brenda and I were living in Rochester, New York, when the offer for the first full-time position was presented to us. The position was in East New York, Brooklyn. Well, cost of living in Rochester was quite a bit cheaper than it was in Brooklyn. Brenda and I, we had just bought our first home. We hadn't even lived in it for 2 years. Our children was accustomed to having a front yard and a backyard to play in. Many houses in Brooklyn don't have front and backyards. So if I was to take the position, I would have had to take a substantial salary cut. So Brenda and I talked about it, and Brenda has always been a supporter of mine, and she knew that doing ministry full-time was my dream job. Now, what made us kind of really change our minds or encourage us to take the position were the promises that were made to us. Promises like, as the church would grow, my salary would keep pace. The house that we were moving into was owned by the church, and that the house would become ours free and clear after 15 years of service. Well, promises made were not promises kept. Pastor's salary kept pace. Mine didn't. When I first went there, the music department was less than 100 people. In 5 years, it had grown to 500 people. When I went there, the church membership was approximately 1,400. In 5 years, it had grown to 4,000. Again, pastor's salary kept pace. Mine didn't. And nobody was suggesting that it should. So I asked for a salary increase, and I will never forget what the pastor said to me. He said, you know, you make more than the average musician in this town. And my reply to him was, that may be true, but I'm not average. I never received that salary increase, by the way. You know, I've heard it said many, many times that there's a shortage of musicians. Let me make it clear, there's no shortage of musicians, but there is a shortage of musicians who are willing to entrust themselves, their family, and their future to the church. You see, integrity is essential for effective leadership. You know, musicians are often criticized for taking jobs that are of a non-religious nature, like playing with a band or playing for a secular artist or playing in a hotel supper club, things like that. You know, people will say, you know, they're not serious about ministry. Now, let me get this straight. The church won't pay the musician an adequate salary, an adequate wage, while criticizing the musician for trying to support his family and make ends meet? Really? Just have faith, the church will say. The Lord will provide, and he certainly will. Perhaps that's the reason why these other opportunities present themselves, so that he or she can support his family and make ends meet. Let me ask you, how long should the musician wait? How long should the minister of music wait for the church to acknowledge his or her worth, his or her value? You know, you say all musicians want is money. It's not all we want. But we do want to be able to support ourselves and support our family without struggling to make ends meet, living from one paycheck to the next paycheck. You know, that salary I was telling you that I asked for that I never got? One of the trustees walked up to me after that and said, you know, I'm sorry, you know, you didn't get what you were asking for, but, you know, money isn't everything. Now, first of all, the only kind of person that will make a statement like that is a person who is already financially secure. But they're right. Money isn't everything. But speaking for myself, having money is right up there with breathing. I need it to survive. Well, this is our final session on this topic, compensating the minister of music. I hope that you have heard something that has helped you to grow or to think or rethink the way that you have done ministry. If you think that there's something that was presented in these 4 sessions will be beneficial to someone else, share it. Share it with your friends. There's going to be other topics. The next topic I will be approaching will be equipping the church choir for ministry. But I want to thank you for hanging in there with me. And until we meet again, stay safe and be blessed.